In Thuringia, there could be a major sensation next week as Björn Höcke may become minister president. This is because the AFD is apparently planning a snap election. This would catch the established parties off guard, and then Björn Höcke could even become minister president. Let's take a look at these shocking details. Here we go. Indeed. The established parties in Thuringia are facing a huge catastrophe, as next week could really bring about the worst case scenario for the established parties. Höcke could potentially become the new minister president through a snap election next week. Because after the established parties have behaved completely undemocratically with their firewall and have once again ignored the clear will of the voters, the AFD now indeed seems to have found a new way to truly save our democracy. Because you can absolutely think what you really want of Björn Höcke, you can like him or not. But what absolutely cannot be done under any circumstances is to exclude the election winner from the next government formation in any way. The AFD has received over 30% of the votes in Thuringia, making it the strongest party in the state by a significant margin. And if the CDU now indeed actually is looking to form a coalition without the AFD, meaning without the party with the most voter support, then that is completely undemocratic. That's why the AFD is now striking back and planning a sensational snap election. The Bild newspaper has just recently reported the following. What is Höcke planning for his snap election in Thuringia? Björn Höcke is the shining winner in Thuringia with a clear first place at 31%. According to information from the Bild newspaper, the Thuringia AFD is considering a snap election. Höcke could thus potentially be elected minister president through a Thuringian backdoor in a fast-track process if he can unexpectedly catch the others off guard. Okay, so according to the Bild newspaper, the AFD is now planning this expedited procedure through the backdoor, and thus the snap election of Björn Höcke as minister president. The AFD has not commented on this as of now, but it may be because they are currently feverishly working on the development of this specific plan for the snap election and do not want to reveal any further details in their strategy at this moment. And the fascinating thing is that this snap election is not illegal or morally reprehensible in any way. In fact, it is completely legitimate. It is indeed solely a reaction to the fact that the established parties are ignoring the AFD and completely excluding them from the coalition talks. The AFD is therefore implementing its own plan and excluding the established parties in return. Rather, the established parties are not being excluded. They are indeed simply being confronted with a fait accompli. The Bild newspaper reports that when the new state parliament convenes, with the date still open, the AFD could directly propose a candidacy for Höcke as minister president. Then the election could be scheduled within 48 hours. And if the other four parties in the state parliament, CDU, BSW, Link and SPD, have not agreed on a candidate by then, for example, CDU leader Mario Ferg has indicated that in the first two rounds of voting, where an absolute majority is required, it is unlikely that any candidate will succeed. Björn Höcke can live with that very well. And in this case, Höcke no longer needs an absolute majority. It is enough to simply have the highest number of yes votes. If the competition were to field multiple opposing candidates instead of a joint candidate, or if a backbencher were to run, the AFD could elevate Höcke to office as the strongest faction, without any support. Wow, I mean, that would really be absolutely, truly, indeed incredible if that actually worked. We had a similar situation in the last Thuringia election 5 years ago, where none of the candidates received a majority in the first two rounds of voting, and in the third round, the AFD surprisingly voted for the FDP candidate, who then indeed actually became minister president. Then, As is well known, the huge scandal followed, where Merkel reversed the Thuringia election, and in the end, the leftist Ramelow was re-elected. And as it currently looks, the chances for the success of such a snap election are indeed quite good. 5 years ago, the AfD could not put forward its own candidate because the state president would not accept a proposal for the AfD man, and they would not have received a majority. But this time, the AfD has both the right to propose the state president for 2021, as they are the strongest force, and they also have the age president, who leads the first parliamentary session, and he could then propose Höcke as a candidate for the ministerial office. And since the CDU, which is currently in coalition negotiations, seems currently unable to secure an absolute majority due to their firewall against both the left and the right, they are also thus unable to form a majority government and thus cannot elect a minister-president. And then it could really happen that Björn Höcke becomes the new minister-president in this snap election. And of course, indeed, Mario Voigt could still run and secure an absolute majority with votes from the SPD and BSW, but then he would also be bound to a minority government, which the CDU definitely wants to avoid. Additionally, the CDU is currently working on a compatibility resolution with BSW, which would make both a coalition with BSW and their votes for a minister-president from Voigt completely off limits, because according to Merkel's logic, this would necessitate new elections. And then in 2001, it will get really intense because a third component will be added, namely Bodo Ramelow from the Left Party. Because Ramelow could then exploit the severe and significant chaos within the CDU once again, another time. Just like 5 years ago. True to the saying, when two fight, the third one is happy or the third one wins. Ramelow had already proposed a red alliance with BSW as minister-president this very week. Indeed. And perhaps the leftists are holding secret talks with BSW and are also mocking the CDU. Well, that would really be the ultimate disaster. Because if Ramelow then proposes BSW as minister-president, BSW could, together with the left and SPD, vote exactly for the BSW minister Brenz. And they would then have a razor-thin majority of approximately 33 seats in total, compared to the AfD with a total of 30 seats. And that would really be the ultimate disaster in Thuringia. Then we would once again have a leftist minister-president in Thuringia. Although 63% of the people in Thuringia voted for a conservative government between the AfD and the CDU. And who would be to blame for that? Clearly, it is the CDU, with its blockade and its ideological firewall that is preventing a conservative government. And let me give you a prediction. If we get another left-wing government in the state of Thuringia instead of a conservative government, then the CDU will completely and utterly break apart. Because then really thousands, all voters in our country, will see that by voting for the CDU, they are getting a leftist government. Then, truly, crowds of frustrated voters will switch from the CDU to the AfD. And then we will definitely experience a blue miracle in Brandenburg and in the federal elections. So, one way or another, the AfD and Björn Höcke can now sit back and relax. 2001, because either Höcke will become minister-president through this snap election, or the CDU will completely destroy itself through a leftist alliance or even a completely leftist government. So, it will be extremely exciting, and next week we will experience a great sensation, 2001.